was a typical evening on the farm, with the smell of freshly baked apple pie drifting from the kitchen and the warmth of a crackling fire filling the house. I had just finished a long day's work, my hands sore from the fields, and there was nothing I looked forward to more than sitting down with my family for a hearty dinner. My wife had made her famous apple cider, a drink that always seemed to bring everyone together. I always enjoyed the peacefulness of farm life, the simplicity of it all. Waking up before dawn to the sound of the rooster crowing, working hard under the sun, and sharing dinner with the people I loved. It was a life I cherished. But tonight, as I stepped outside to check on the animals before heading to bed, I noticed something strange. The barn was cast in shadows, and I could have sworn I saw something move across the open door. It was late, and I figured it was just an animal, maybe a raccoon or a deer passing through. Still, the sight of the shadow unsettled me. I stood for a moment, staring at the barn. The air was crisp, and everything around me was quiet, save for the distant croak of a frog and the occasional rustle of the wind in the trees. I turned to head back inside when I saw it again. This time, a shadow moving in and out of the barn door. It was more distinct, and this time, I knew it wasn't an animal. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My heart started to race. I grabbed the flashlight and made my way toward the barn, trying to stay calm. There was a slight rustling sound from within, and I paused, listening. Nothing. But then I heard it again. This time, closer. The unmistakable sound of footsteps. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. Maybe it was a stray animal, or maybe my mind was playing tricks on me after a long day. I approached the barn slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the old barn door as I reached for the handle. I paused for a moment, then pushed the door open, the creaking of the wood echoing in the stillness of the night. The barn was dark, the only light coming from the flashlight in my hand. I scanned the area, but I didn't see anything at first. Then as I stepped deeper into the barn, I noticed something on the floor, some old feed bags scattered around. But it wasn't the bags that caught my attention. It was the faint smell of someone else. The air was thick, stale, with a scent of sweat and something more pungent. And then, in the far corner, I saw him, a figure hunched low, hidden behind a stack of hay bales. His eyes shone in the beam of my flashlight. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. There, crouched in the shadows, was a man. His clothes were dirty, and his face was gaunt, as if he hadn't seen the light of day in weeks. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, my voice firm but shaken. I stepped forward slowly, not wanting to alarm him. The man didn't move at first. His eyes flickered from the floor to me, and then he stood up, his body tense. I could see his hands trembling, slightly as he raised them as if to show he meant no harm. I didn't mean any trouble," he said, his voice shaky. "I've just been hiding out here. I didn't think anyone would catch me. I didn't know what to think." My mind raced. Who was this man? And why had he been living in my barn, stealing food and supplies? I stepped closer, my hand instinctively going to my waist where I kept my pocket knife. "You've been stealing from me, haven't you?" I said, my voice growing cold. The man's eyes darted toward the corner of the barn, and I saw it. A sickle, half hidden behind a pile of feed bags. It had been left there, right where he'd been hiding. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something wasn't right. The man's hands began to shake more violently. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he stammered, his voice barely audible. I needed food. I didn't know what else to do. Please, just let me go." I was done trying to reason with him. I could feel the anger building in my chest. "You've been hiding in my barn, stealing from my family, and now you're telling me it's a mistake?" Before I could take another step, the man grabbed the sickle, his movements quick and desperate. The blade gleamed in the dim light as he swung it toward me. The sickle flashed in the air, the sharp blade glinting dangerously in the light of my flashlight. I dodged to the side, narrowly avoiding the swing, my heart pounding in my chest. The man's desperation was clear. His hands were shaking as he tried to strike again, but his aim was off. I didn't wait for him to swing a second time. In one quick motion, I lunged forward, tackling him to the ground. The sickle flew from his grip, skidding across the floor of the barn with a metallic clatter. We both struggled on the ground, my grip tightening around his shirt as he thrashed beneath me. "Stop, just stop," I shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. But he kept fighting, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was stronger than I expected, fueled by fear and desperation. I finally managed to get on top of him, pinning his arms to the ground. His eyes were wide with panic as he tried to wriggle free. I could feel his chest heaving under me, his body drenched in sweat. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said through gritted teeth, trying to stay calm. "But you need to stop." He stared at me, and for a moment I thought he might listen. But then I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't going to give up. His legs kicked out, pushing me off balance, and before I could react, he scrambled toward the sickle, grabbing it with trembling hands. I didn't hesitate this time. I leapt forward, knocking the sickle out of his hands once again, and this time, I held him down with all my weight. He stopped moving, his body going limp beneath me as though the fight had drained from him entirely. The barn was eerily silent now, except for the sound of our ragged breaths. I held him down for a moment longer, just to be sure he wasn't going to make another move. Then, with a deep breath, I let him up, but I kept my eyes on him, watching his every move. "Stay there," I ordered, my voice firm. I quickly stood up and pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers shaking as I dialed the police. I gave them a quick rundown of the situation, trying to stay calm. The operator assured me that help was on the way, but the urgency in her voice only heightened my anxiety. I backed away from the intruder, keeping my distance. He was sitting against the wall now, his head bowed, his breathing steadying. He wasn't going anywhere, not while I had him cornered. "I didn't want this," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've just been trying to survive. I didn't know where else to go." I didn't respond, my mind racing. He was right about one thing. He had been hiding here, stealing food from me and likely other farms, but his reasons didn't make his actions any more excusable. By the time I heard the sound of the police sirens in the distance, I was feeling a small sense of relief. Help was on the way. I turned back toward the intruder one last time, only to find him standing up, his eyes darting nervously around the barn. Before I could react, he lunged for the door, pushing past me with surprising strength. I reached out to grab him, but it was too late. He was already running into the night, disappearing into the dark woods beyond the barn. I shouted for him to stop, but he was already gone. The sound of his footsteps faded into the distance, leaving me standing there, breathless and shaken. The police arrived a few minutes later, and I quickly explained what had happened. They searched the barn and the surrounding area, but by then the intruder was nowhere to be found. The only evidence left behind was the sickle, which they carefully took into evidence. The officer turned to me, a grim look on his face. "We'll keep an eye out, but it seems like he managed to escape before we got here. Be on alert." I nodded, feeling a sense of unease settle deep in my chest. The intruder's motives were still unclear, and now he was gone, leaving me with more questions than answers. As I watched the police leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the threat wasn't over. The woods were quiet now, but the silence felt more like a warning than peace. Whoever had been hiding in my barn wasn't just a thief. It was supposed to be just another peaceful drive, the kind of road trip I had come to love as a freelance journalist. With my favorite granola bars beside me and a steaming cup of hot coffee from a roadside diner in hand, I was ready to enjoy the quiet countryside. The winding roads stretched ahead, the rolling hills and endless fields offering a perfect backdrop to my thoughts. I often found comfort in these solitary trips. There was something about the open road that calmed my mind, allowed me to sort through ideas and clear the clutter. My GPS had been my guide for the past few hundred miles, helping me navigate the unfamiliar terrain, but soon, the gentle hum of the road trip turned into something more unsettling. I glanced down at the GPS screen to find it had gone blank. No signal. I tapped at the screen, but nothing changed. A sinking feeling began to settle in my stomach. I had driven through remote areas before, but the silence of this place felt different. Isolated, almost suffocating. I pulled over to the side of the road, hoping to recalibrate the system, but the screen remained stubbornly blank. I checked my phone, only to be met with the dreaded no signal message. With the sun beginning to set, I had no choice but to keep driving, hoping to find a town or a gas station where I could ask for directions. As the minutes passed, the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the dimming light cast long shadows across the land. Just when I thought I was completely alone, I spotted a small farmhouse in the distance. It seemed like my only hope for finding my way. I breathed a sigh of relief and decided to pull in and ask for directions. The house looked old, but well kept, nestled at the edge of the woods with a faint light glowing from the windows. I parked my car at the edge of the dirt driveway and knocked on the door, hoping the homeowner was kind enough to offer some assistance. The door creaked open, revealing an older man with a weathered face and a slow, deliberate gait. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Neutral, yet guarded. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his voice raspy, as though he hadn't spoken to anyone in a while. "I seem to have lost my way," I explained, trying to sound calm. Despite the nagging sense of unease growing inside me, my GPS stopped working and I'm hoping you could point me in the right direction. He smiled faintly, his eyes scanning the road behind me. "Of course," he said, his voice a little too slow. "But it's getting dark. Why don't you come inside? I'll get you a drink and we can talk about your route." I hesitated for a moment. The farmhouse looked isolated and I wasn't used to trusting strangers. But there was something about the man's demeanor, something that felt off, but not threatening enough to refuse. "Just for a moment," I said, trying to appear casual, as I followed him inside. "I'll be on my way as soon as I get directions." He led me through a narrow hallway into a small living room. The air inside was warm, and the scent of something faintly metallic mixed with the smell of old wood. It was cozy, but there was a strange heaviness to the atmosphere, as if the house had secrets of its own. "Make yourself comfortable," he said, gesturing to a worn armchair. I sat down, but couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The man disappeared into the kitchen and I glanced around the room. Old furniture lined the walls and a few pictures hung on the faded wallpaper. My eyes lingered on one photo, a black and white image of the man, looking younger with a family beside him. I tried to ignore the growing unease in my chest, but the silence felt thick, almost suffocating. The man returned with a glass of water, but my nerves were getting the better of me. "So, how long have you lived here?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation light. "Oh, many years," he replied, taking a seat across from me. His eyes never left mine. "It's a quiet life, peaceful. I don't get many visitors." I nodded, feeling the tension rise between us. There was something in his tone, something about the way he spoke that made my skin crawl. I quickly took a sip of the water, but the moment I set the glass down, the air felt heavier. My instincts told me that I needed to leave. Now. "I think I should be going," I said, standing up quickly. "I've already taken up too much of your time." Man's smile faded as he stood up. Now. You can't leave just yet," he said softly, his voice suddenly colder, more commanding. "It's too late to be out there on your own." A chill ran down my spine. Something about his demeanor shifted, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt truly trapped. The door was just a few feet away, but the man was blocking my path. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the man blocking the door. My pulse quickened, and the warmth that had settled in the room now felt stifling. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to push past him and escape into the night. But something in his eyes, something that was almost predatory, kept me rooted in place. "Please let me go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I really must be on my way." The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a slow step toward me, his eyes narrowing slightly as if assessing whether I would attempt to run. My hand instinctively reached for my phone in my pocket, but when I looked down, I realized the screen was black. "No signal. You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and cold, laced with a sense of finality that sent a shiver down my spine. "Not until I've had my fill." My breath caught in my throat. A knot of fear tightened in my chest as his words sank in. This wasn't just a polite offer for directions, it was a trap. His intentions had been clear from the moment I entered the house. I had walked straight into his lair, and now there was no easy way out. I looked around frantically, my mind racing. The windows were too high to jump through. The door was blocked. My heart pounded in my ears, but I forced myself to stay calm. He wasn't physically imposing, but there was something in his demeanor, something that made me feel like I was in a fight for my life. He took another step toward me, and in that moment, I knew I had to act. I took a deep breath and dashed toward the door, hoping to push past him, but he was quicker than I expected. In a blur of motion, he grabbed my wrist, his grip firm and unyielding. I yanked my arm back, but his hand tightened, pulling me toward him with surprising strength. "Don't make this harder on yourself," he warned, his voice steady, but there was a malicious edge to it now. My heart raced as panic set in. I was trapped. This wasn't some misunderstanding. It was a calculated move on his part. He had been waiting for someone like me. "Let go of me," I screamed, trying to break free from his grip, but the more I struggled, the tighter his hold became. I could hear the sound of my breath, shallow and frantic, as I wrenched myself away from him with all the strength I could muster. I glanced around the room once more. There had to be something, anything, that I could use to defend myself. My eyes landed on a nearby chair. It wasn't much, but it was something. With all the force I could muster, I swung the chair toward him, knocking it into his chest. The force of the impact sent him stumbling back a few steps, momentarily dazed. I didn't hesitate. In that instant, I bolted toward the door. The man's angry shout followed me, but I didn't look back. I wrenched open the door, stumbling out into the cold night air, gasping for breath as I sprinted away from the house. The road ahead was dark, but I knew I had to keep moving. My mind raced, but my body carried me forward, adrenaline pushing me through the fear. I didn't dare look back until I reached the end of the driveway, and by then, I was a few hundred feet away. My phone was still dead, but I knew I had to get help. I kept running, my legs burning, but I pushed through the pain. I spotted a faint light ahead, a house just a little further down the road. I stumbled toward it, barely able to breathe from the exertion and panic. I knocked on the door and a kind woman opened it. She seemed startled, but I barely had the strength to explain. "Please, I need help. There's a man. He tried to keep me inside." The woman immediately let me in, locking the door behind me. "Stay here," she said. "I'll call the police." I collapsed onto the couch, my heart still racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The woman spoke. "To the police," and within minutes they arrived. I explained what had happened, my voice trembling as I relayed the details. I was still in shock, my mind struggling to process everything that had happened. The officers listened carefully, and one of them examined the driveway. "We'll check the area," he said, nodding to his partner. "But you're lucky you got away." The man had escaped. He had been expecting someone like me, and he wasn't going to let me go so easily. But now at least the police had a lead, and I was no longer alone. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as I sipped from my thermos, the steam rising gently into the cool night air. It was quiet, the only sound being the occasional creak of the old farmhouse as the wind passed through the trees. I'd spent long hours in the field today, and a warm cup of coffee was the only thing keeping me going. As always, the comforting taste reminded me of simpler times, especially mornings spent with my family over a home-cooked breakfast. My mother's pot roast was the dish I always looked forward to, but tonight I had to settle for the warmth of the coffee and the familiarity of my nightly routine. I was halfway through my cup when the peace of the night was shattered. A loud engine noise, followed by the rumbling of a vehicle, startled me. It wasn't a sound I was used to at this hour, especially not out here in the middle of nowhere. I stood up, setting my thermos down with a quiet thud. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I made my way to the window. The headlights of a car cut through the rain, casting long shadows over the yard. I couldn't see who it was, but my instincts were already on high alert. I glanced back at my wife, Sarah, and my kids. They were all fast asleep upstairs. I didn't want to alarm them, but something didn't feel right. I grabbed my jacket, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my gut. I had spent countless nights out here, never once hearing a vehicle pull up at this hour. Stepping out into the cold night, I crept toward the front door, trying to be as quiet as possible. I had to know who it was. The car came to a stop just outside my porch, and the engine went quiet. The faint sound of footsteps reached my ears, sending a chill down my spine. I opened the door just enough to peer out. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, emerged from the shadows. His face was obscured by a hood, and he was holding something in his hand, but I couldn't make it out in the darkness. "Who are you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, though I could feel my heart racing. "What do you want?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, the sound of his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. My mind raced. Was he a trespasser? Or someone lost in the storm? Finally, his voice broke the silence, low and menacing. "I need money. Now." The demand hit me like a punch to the stomach. My eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. I tried to stay calm, but the fear was starting to rise. This wasn't just a man asking for help. This was a threat. "Get off my property," I said, my voice firm. But the man didn't move. Instead, he reached behind his back and pulled out a chainsaw. My heart skipped a beat. The roar of the chainsaw sliced through the air, and I knew I had no time to waste. I grabbed the rifle from its stand by the door, my hands shaking but my grip firm. As I stepped back into the house, the noise of the confrontation must have woken Sarah. She quickly rushed out of the bedroom, her eyes wide with panic. "What's going on?" she asked, but I barely had time to answer. I was already heading back to the door, the rifle held firmly in my hands. I turned to her, trying to mask the fear in my voice. "Stay inside and lock the door. Call the police." Sarah didn't hesitate. She grabbed the phone from the table and dialed as I stepped back outside. But I could hear the tension in her voice as she spoke to the authorities, and the man was right there, standing just beyond the porch, his eyes wild, the weapon in his hands a terrifying reminder of the situation. I steadied myself, my heart pounding as the man stepped closer, the chainsaw buzzing menacingly in the dark. He was getting closer. I had no choice but to defend myself. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice rising above the storm. "You don't need to do this, just leave." But the man didn't listen. Instead, he stepped forward, lifting the chainsaw and revving the engine even higher, its growl deafening in the night. My body tensed. I aimed the rifle, but I couldn't bring myself to fire. Not yet. He was too close, his presence overwhelming, and then in an instant he lunged. The chainsaw came at me with terrifying speed. I barely had time to react. My instincts kicked in as I sidestepped, feeling the blade of the chainsaw whoosh past me. The sound of it cutting through the air filled my ears. I swung the rifle at him, trying to knock the chainsaw out of his hands. The force of my swing caught him off guard, and the chainsaw slipped from his grip, skidding across the porch. But he wasn't done. With surprising strength, the man tackled me, sending us both tumbling to the ground. The struggle was frantic, and my breath came in ragged gasps. I could feel the weight of him on top of me, his fists pounding at my face. I fought back with everything I had, knowing I couldn't let him get the upper hand. My fingers closed around the hunting knife I kept in my pocket, and I drove it into his side with a desperate twist. The man let out a sharp grunt, but he didn't stop. He shoved me off him, pushing himself to his feet with fury in his eyes. By now, Sarah was inside, speaking with the police, her voice steady but urgent. I could hear the calm commands from the operator on the other end, telling her help was on the way. I didn't have much time before the man recovered. I rushed at him again, determined to end this. We clashed, the fight growing more brutal by the second. My head spun from the impact and my body ached, but I knew I had to finish it. I managed to overpower him, knocking him to the ground. I straddled his chest, pinning his arms to the ground as I held the knife in my hand. The man was panting beneath me, his resistance weakening. The sound of sirens grew louder, and just as I thought I might have him completely under control, the police arrived. 2 officers rushed onto the porch, guns drawn. They quickly assessed the situation, their focus shifting between me and the attacker. "Step away from him," one of the officers commanded. I hesitated for a moment, but the sight of them made the reality of the situation set in. I stood up slowly, my legs shaky from the adrenaline, and the officers moved in. The man was arrested without further incident. He didn't fight back as they cuffed him and read him his rights. I stood back, watching as the authorities took control of the scene. The chainsaw lay on the porch, silent now, but the memory of its roar still echoed in my mind. My heart was still racing, but at least my family was safe. The attacker was charged with robbery and assault. As the officers led him away, I watched them disappear into the night, feeling a strange sense of relief. The storm had passed, but the fear remained. Inside, Sarah came to stand beside me, her hand on my shoulder. I looked at her, her face pale but calm. The worst was over. For now.